Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the third chapter in the book of Ephesians. But before we cover it verse by verse with our commentary and analysis, we just want to briefly review what takes place in the antecedent second chapter. It opens with that they were dead in trespasses and sin, but then in the fifth verse we find that they have been brought and restored and renewed to life. And then there's the great through grace by faith. This is our avenue of salvation. There is no element of legalism in the new covenant understanding or even the old covenant correctly understood. There's nothing we can do. You can work your fingers to the bones. That will not save you. It is solely through grace, accessed by faith, that we are saved. And there's also an important verse in the 11th, which reads, "Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, made in the flesh by hands, that at that time you were without Messiah, excluded from the citizenship of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. But now Messiah Yahshua, whom you were once afar off, have been brought near by the blood of Messiah." So this bleeds into the next chapter. He delineates much of the mystery of the great plan of God's great plan for the inclusion and the equality of the Gentiles in the new assembly. And then the second chapter kind of closes with the call to be a living temple, and we are all together built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and the Messiah himself is the chief cornerstone, so he is the foundational building block of the church, which we collectively comprise and are together in. That's the 20th verse. And then the opening verse of the third chapter reads, "Because of this, I, Paul, the prisoner of Yahshua Messiah, on behalf of you Gentiles." So he's speaking to the Gentiles, and the word prisoner is interesting because ever since he had been converted, he had been imprisoned by the Messiah. He was on the road to Damascus. He was fully intent on arresting and imprisoning the followers of the way, when who should arrest and imprison him but the visible resurrected form of Yahshua Messiah. And he essentially, for all intents and purpose, he was his prisoner, and a willful one at that. This also ties into the paradox, which is elsewhere elucidated throughout the epistles of Paul, of the free man being enslaved to the Messiah and the slaves being liberated. So he had no sense of his own will. He was wholly and totally submitted to the will of the one who had called him, and for that he classified himself as a prisoner. "If indeed you have heard of the administration of the grace of Elohim that was given to me for you," so it was given to me for you. He was the messenger and the mouthpiece and the intermediary of divinity to humanity to spread the message of grace. The new covenant is alternately likened to the dispensation of the church, or grace. So grace takes it has a renewed emphasis. That's not to suggest that grace was altogether diminished or absent in the old covenant. It's only to say that we have a fuller understanding than perhaps they did of the centrifugal force which is grace. "That by revelation was made known to me the mystery, as I wrote before briefly." Now the term mystery is a theological term for what was once mysterious but is now made manifest. So the mystery was secret, but it's no longer secret now that Paul had been entrusted to its revelation, and as the mouthpiece of divinity and the commissioned apostle to the uncircumcised or Gentiles, he's going to tell them what he had been told and revealed. He's going to reveal to them what he had been revealed himself by the one in heaven. "In reading this, then, you are able to understand my insight into the mystery of Messiah." So he's communicating to them via writing. He's expressing in writing the dimensions and the elements of this mystery, and when the puzzle pieces are all connected, what was once mysterious now makes sense. "Which was not made known to the sons of men in other generations, as it has now been revealed by the Spirit to his sacred apostles and prophets." So this reminds us somewhere in Luke's 10th chapter where the Messiah tells his present disciples that kings and prophets of old had longed for the knowledge of which he was now bringing him here. This is something Paul very much reiterates without exactly repeating, that what they have is a privilege that was unforeseen and unknown in generations past, and all things become new in the Messiah. So this a lot of people are new to this message in every generation since, even though it is 2,000 years old. We all come to an awareness of it at some definable moment and location in our life. The Gentiles to be co-heirs, united in the same body, and partakers together in the promise in Messiah through the good news. Now, in the Old Covenant, there was a separatism and exclusivism about the Jews. They wanted nothing to do with the Gentiles. They considered them dogs, was a derogatory term which they referred to them, and as less than or inferior to them. But in the New Covenant, they are entitled to all the privileges and inheritance as the Jews, and they are united in the same body. They are equal and one under the Messiah, and they are mutual partakers in the promise of Messiah, which is declared through the good news, which is the message he is spreading, which began with the Messiah but has been spread by his apostles from essentially Acts to Revelation. Of which I became a servant according to the gift of the grace of Elohim, given to me according to the working of his power. So he was made a prisoner and a servant, we read here. So that's alternately translated as minister, but it was through the gift of the grace that he had been so called and so chosen and so selected, and it was according not to any power working in himself, but a power above him working in him and through him to make this message manifest and to bring it to pass much of what he had promised through the Messiah. So we get, even though the Messiah confined the disciples who walked with him, he confined their ministry to the lost sheep of Israel. We read in Matthew 10:5-6. He ultimately tells them by the end of Matthew's book that they are to spread the good news to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Spirit. To me, the very least of all the saints, this grace was given to bring the good news of the unsearchable riches of Messiah among the Gentiles. So even though we like to exalt and esteem Paul as perhaps the greatest Christian who ever lived, he did not consider himself that. He had a self-deprecating sense of unworthiness given his shameful past, he made mistakes, but the mistakes didn't make him. And he was moving forward. He had a past that it was sordid and shameful, but he refused to be stuck and mired in the past, although he did have a memory of what he once was and what he had been transformed into. So this is the unsearchable riches. That means there's you cannot there's no limit to its dimensions or measurement. It is immeasurable, and it is included among the Gentiles. So he is addressing a primarily Gentile audience, you understand. So this is his target audience, and he wants to make known to them what was made known to him through the one above him. And to make all see how this mystery is administered, which for ages past has been hidden in Yahweh, who created all, through Yahshua Messiah. So the making sense of the mystery, what was formerly unveiled, is now being unveiled, and it's he's expressing it coherently and credulously so that it can be comprehended. And this was for a great period of time, for some 4,000 years, a hidden secret, but it was now manifest and has been with us ever since. And its author is identified as Yahweh, who gives it through his Son, Yahshua Messiah. So that now, through the assembly, the many-sided wisdom of Elohim might be known to the principalities and authorities in the heaven. The many-sided wisdom, there is an inexhaustible limit, or unlimited, an inexhaustible, illimitable dimensions to his omniscience, which is the attribute of infinite or unlimited intelligence and wisdom. So there's no unidirectional emphasis on the wisdom of Yahweh, or Elohim, and it is to be known to the and it is formerly concealed even from the angels in heaven. We know that's how we interpret principalities and authorities in the heavens. So what Paul was giving to them was previously unknown even to the angels, and that just gives us a sense of the remarkable privilege that we are privy to know what was formerly concealed even from the angels themselves. According to the everlasting purpose which he made in Messiah, Yahshua, our Master. This purpose is everlasting, that can easily translate as eternal or without beginning and without end. So even though the mystery it was revealed at a definable location in history, it was parted and connected to something eternal laid before the foundation of the earth, to bring us back to Ephesians 1:4, which was now made known it's the purpose is in the Messiah, but its messenger is Paul, in whom we have boldness and access with reliance through belief in him. Boldness, this reminds us of Proverbs 28:1, the wicked flee when none pursueth, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. So when you become a Christian and are authentically born again, there's a boldness that comes across you. It makes you not afraid to deliver the message with which you have been entrusted at all hazard and health and risk of reputation. We who have counted the cost have considered the cost and declared any injury or hazard or danger to be worth the message we are entrusted to spread. And we have unlimited access to a totally dependable and reliable, and that is the avenue of that access is through faith in him who is the Messiah, who is the namesake and object of our faith. I pray, therefore, that you do not lose heart at my pressures on your behalf, which is in your esteem. Pressures is alternately translated as persecution. So Paul endured a lot for their sake, and not for his own sake. He did not, being an intelligent creature with agency, he would not endure the pain which had been inflicted upon him unless he had concrete certainty that it was for a greater purpose, and the message had spread in his chains and in his persecution, so it was all worth it to him. And he's telling them to look at him as a model, an example of the willingness to endure that which is beyond the natural man's capacity to endure. So they too will be persecuted, perhaps not as severely or extremely as Paul, but persecution comes with the job description of the disciple. We are all called to endure whatever form of persecution. Now in 21st century America, that persecution is rather benign, at least in the age we find ourselves in, but it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. For this reason, I bow my knees to the Father of our Master Yahshua, Messiah. So being privileged to this access of information and revelation, there's only one legitimate response, that is to bend one's knees in surrender and submission, and to go where he wants us to go, do what he wants us to do, say what he wants us to say, and be who he wants us to be. So Paul, strictly speaking, did not consider his life his own, but he was very much in bondage and a willful prisoner of the Messiah at that. From whom all fatherhood in the heaven and earth is named, in order that he might give you, according to the riches of his esteem, by power, to be strengthened in the inner man through his Spirit. So this begins a prayer, which is a trajectory or a periscope. It's not to be interpreted as isolated individuals, but they logically connect and flow from one to another. So what we read in the next verse, that Messiah might dwell in your hearts through faith, having become rooted and grounded in love. So he is the source of all love, and the secret to loving our fellow man is to love him perfectly. The two great commandments that the Master himself identified was love Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy mind, might, and strength, all your faculties and all their capacities, and to love your neighbor as yourself. But that can only be attained inasmuch as we approach the nucleus of our love, who gives meaning to our love and adds another dimension to a love that is beyond the natural man's capacities to duplicate or emulate or in any way embody. In order that you might be strengthened to firmly grasp with all the saints what is the width and length and depth and height. So there there is, strictly speaking, no measurable width, length, depth, and height to the mystery and the greatness and the treasure and the wealth that he is revealing to them. But he wants them to firmly grasp it. That means understand it and enact it and embody it with all the saints. So the three-letter word all entails universality, an element of universality. This is not the select ministry of a privileged few, but it's to be all our messages, and we are all ministers in the same message. To know the love of Messiah, which surpasses knowledge, in order that you might be filled to all the completeness of Elohim. Completeness is alternately translated as fullness, but I want to concentrate rather on the extent of the love of Messiah, which transcends in there's no knowledge. It is it cannot be assessed from rational or human wisdom terms, because it makes no sense to the natural man that the spotless and sinless Lamb would be poured out the wrath of his own Father in order to let you slide. That is beyond anything we can reason or fathom, but it even though we can't make total sense of it, we have to embrace it and accept it by faith. And we don't have to understand. There are many things about this book that I do not understand, but nowhere am I told in this book that I am called to understand it all. We are called to believe. And to him who is able to do exceedingly above that which we ask or think, according to the power that is working in us. So there's a transcendent dimension of the power of the one he petitions and summons on. There is no task that is too impossible for him. All the things that are impossible for man are possible for Elohim. We read of in Luke 1:37 and 18:27. So we got to eliminate the idea altogether of the impossibility. What seems impossible to us is, in most cases, possible to Elohim. Of course, that is not strictly speaking true. It is impossible for him to contradict his sacred nature. But with the reasonable limitation, we understand that everything that is necessary and commensurate with his will and his purpose will become possible through faith. And it's working in us and around us, and the one who is above us is working in us and through us to others. So we are vessels and ministers and messengers of his love and his grace and his power to redeem and save lost sinners. To him be esteem in the assembly by Messiah Yahshua unto all generations forever and ever. Amen. So there's an eternal element, or at least an immortal element at this point in that extends to all the generations, present and future. So this message in this ministry is as much our own as it was Paul's, and I hope that's the reason you're here, to know the message we are called to minister, and to minister it, enact it, embody it, and to spread it. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. See you then. Bye-bye.